All right, good afternoon, Detective Cruz.
Good afternoon.
All right, so I'm going to start with kind of a silly way to go about things. I'm going to show you what has been marked as Defense 6, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach the witness?
Yes. Yes,
Okay. Do you recognize that individual?
I do.
Okay. Can you tell us who that individual is in that picture?
That is Ben Michael.
Okay. Your Honor, request to publish to the jury the picture. Move to admit. And then yes.
No objection from the state.
All right. So that's the gentleman that you dealt with named Benyamin Ben Michael?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So Detective Cruz, you were pretty much involved in this case pretty much from the very beginning.
That's correct.
And the only people that were there ahead of you were EMS and some of your responding officers, correct?
That is correct.
All right. So you were assigned to this case by your sergeant?
My lieutenant.
Lieutenant, okay. Also involved in this case was your Sergeant Hamilton, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so you were the lead on this case, and he is your supervisor, correct?
That is correct.
All right, but he also assisted you in this investigation and did things alongside of you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I think we saw him on one of the body cams that he was there as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so on December the 8th, when you went out to the scene, you told us earlier that the first thing you had everybody do, which some of your officers had actually done it, was separate all these individuals, correct?
That's correct.
And the purpose behind that was you didn't want any of these people talking to each other or anything else like that, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know if any of these individuals had their devices still at that point in time?
They all had their devices at that point in time.
Okay. But it wasn't until you got the search warrants, I think, to take those that you took them from Benyamin and Sarah?
That's correct.
Okay. And you didn't seek a search warrant for Jessica's phone?
No, I did not.
Or Mr. Spiller's?
No, I did not.
Okay. And part of the reason you want to do that is you want to keep them separate for an independent account of what actually happened, correct?
That's correct.
And give them some time to kind of process everything that they had just gone through.
Yes.
All right, so at some point later, after the scene, I guess, for lack of a better term, calmed down, your officers individually transported them to your precinct down here in downtown Canton, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and the first individual you spoke to was Benyamin, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and all of these individuals were put in separate areas, correct?
That's correct.
They weren't in a general waiting room or lobby together, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So they didn't have an opportunity when they were at the police department to kind of talk or engage with one another?
No, and if they were in a room together, there was an officer there with them.
With them. Do you know if any of them still had any of their devices with them at that point in time?
The only people who didn't have their device would have been Chloe Driver. Her device was in the bag, and then Benyamin had his while I was talking to him, and I asked for it after that.
Okay. And when you asked for it, what was his reaction initially?
Oh, he didn't even want me to touch it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when was and then after you talked to Benyamin, you talked to Mr. Spillers, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and then went and talked to, I think, Sarah next?
That's correct.
Okay. And actually, was it Sergeant Hamilton that talked to Jessica Kafijian?
I don't know if it was Jesse Hamilton or if it was Jesse Ray.
Okay.
I don't know. One of the Jessies did.
All right. And then the last person I think y'all spoke to was Mr. Ablin that night, correct?
That's correct.
And all of these interviews are going on while there's still an active investigation going on at the house, correct?
Correct.
And that's all that crime scene processing and everything else that we saw earlier?
That's correct.
Okay. When was the first time you spoke to Eric and Renee Driver?
I believe it was the following day.
Okay. Did they contact you or do you recall you contacting them?
Now, I'm not sure if you had this, but Sergeant Hamilton actually spoke to them first.
Okay.
I think he is the one who did the notification.
Okay, and that could have been on the 8th?
It could have been, I'm not sure.
All right, but somebody notified them of what was happening at least that particular day, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so, and then based on, do you recall when you received a video from Miss Renee Driver?
So yes, she sent it in an email. And again, I don't know the exact date of the email, but yes, she did send me a video.
Okay, and you don't recall if that was on December the 8th or December the 9th?
No, I don't. And I know it wasn't on December the 8th.
Okay. And you received that video from the drivers prior to making contact with Chloe on December the 9th, correct?
No, actually, I received that video when I spoke to them afterwards. They actually came to Georgia, and she told me about all of those things, and she sent to me an email after that.
Okay, but if you watch the body cams, correct?
Yes.
And when you're with Chloe at that particular point in time, it was either the 9th or the 10th, and I'll check my notes in just a minute.
It might be the 10th.
Okay, but at that point, you had met with Chloe one time.
Yep,
And
and then met with the drivers, and then met with Chloe again.
Okay. If the interview that you have with the drivers isn't until the 11th, would that refresh your recollection?
It wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me show you. Could it have been a phone call you're thinking of?
Maybe.
Okay, so a formal interview didn't actually take place until the 11th, but you had some kind of phone calls and
Yes.
exchanges with them. Okay.
Yes.
I'll try to be a little clearer about
Yes.
that. I know there's a lot of moving parts for you in this case. All right, so, but you had you had obtained that video from the driver,
Renee.
Renee, prior to showing-
Interviewing them, yes.
Okay. And that interview, when you received that video, what did you do with the video?
I actually showed Chloe the video.
Okay, but you obviously watched it first.
I did.
Okay, and that became part of your case file, correct?
Yes.
All right. At this time, I would move to admit the video from November 27th, 2020.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I do object. She didn't take the video. She's not the right person to authenticate the video. I'd ask that come in with Renee Driver. The fact that she had it in her case file is not the
I'm not,
authentication.
sorry, Ms. Crawford. I'm not tendering it for what the contents are or the truth of the matter asserted. She received that video and she can verify that that in fact is the video that she watched and referenced and showed Chloe on December the 10th.
And this is D6? No. This is D7?
D7.
All right, I think you need to lay further foundation for it before
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
admissible.
Sure. So you received this this video directly from Ms. Driver, correct?
That's correct.
Do you remember what email it came from? Or whether it came directly from her cell phone to yours?
I don't. I'm sorry.
Can you clarify which Ms. Driver?
I'm sorry, Ms. Renee Driver.
I'm sorry. I don't know if it came via text or email.
But you don't have any doubt in your mind that it came from Ms. Renee Driver, correct?
Correct.
And that she had articulated to you that that was a video coming directly from her cell phone, correct?
Yes, she said she was going to be sending it.
Okay. I would again move to tender defense 6. 7.
I have the same objection, Your Honor. This witness cannot lay the foundation for what that video is, when it was taken, what was depicted in it. That needs to come from Ms. Renee Driver. Same objection.
Okay. If you can explore it any further, I'll allow it. Otherwise, I will sustain the objection to admissibility at this time.
Okay. Based on your receipt of that video, you took that video to show it to Chloe as part of your investigation, correct?
Correct.
Because it raised some concerns to you, correct?
Yes.
And you don't have any reason to doubt that what the information was with respect to the date and time that was received directly from the file from Ms. Renee Driver, correct?
I'm sorry. Say that.
That the date and time on that you didn't have any reason to believe the authentication or that it wasn't authentic what she had sent you, meaning that there was any date or time change or anything else on that.
Now that I couldn't tell you.
Okay, but all you know is that in response to your investigation, Renee Driver told you that she had this video and that she thought it was important to the case.
She thought it was important to the case. She sent it to me.
Okay, and based on that, you took that information and took that to Chloe on December the 10th and showed her that video.
I showed Chloe the video. I wanted more context on the video.
And as we saw in the body cam earlier, she indicated that that was in fact her in that video, correct?
Yes.
And that she identified herself as taking that video or being the part of that video from her mom's cell phone.
I'm assuming so.
Okay. You don't have a specific recollection, but she didn't say anything like, no, that's fake or anything like that.
All she did was wave her hand when I showed it to her.
That's as if she didn't want to see it again?
Correct.
Okay. Again, Judge, I'll move to Tender defense 7.
I have the same objection. I don't think the proper foundation's been laid.
All right, I will allow D7 to be admitted over objection.
Request permission to publish, Judge.
Go ahead.
My name is Renee Driver. It's 11/27/2020. I'm being forced to get into a truck with Benyamin or Brian Joyce to see my daughter again because he has kept her away from me. I do not know where she is, and he won't tell me anything. He's kept her with people that I don't really know well, and I don't know what's going on with her. And I'm being forced to get in the car and go with him to be able to see her. And I don't even know if I'm actually going straight to her, but I'm doing whatever I think I can to get to her. Her name is Taina Driver.
And that's the same video you showed her at the hospital, correct?
That's the same video I showed her.
Okay. Did Miss Renee Driver also send you some screenshots of some text messages?
Yes,
Okay. And did you make those text messages part of your case file?
I did.
Okay. And you again don't remember the specific date that you received those?
I'm sorry, I don't.
That's okay. I'm gonna show you.
This is one of the photos that she sent to me.
Okay, so Miss Renee Driver sent you that picture. Okay. And that again came from her cell phone or her email directly to you? Okay. And you made that part of your case file?
I did.
Okay. Is the person that is depicted in that particular photo the same individual you were conducting this investigation on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you have any date reference in as to when that picture was in fact taken?
I do not.
Okay. We would move to admit defense 8. Is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, it's admitted.
Is this the picture that I just showed you marked as defense 8?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that's the picture that you said you received from Miss Driver, Renee Driver?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. All right. So on December the 9th was the very next day, and you had not gone out and talked to Chloe anytime on the 8th, correct? You were busy doing all of those interviews
Yeah.
and everything else, but you were being apprised of what her condition and everything was?
Yes.
Okay. And you also spoke to some other individuals on the 9th. Do you recall who you spoke to?
I believe I spoke to Ben Michael. I believe I spoke to Jason and Sarah again.
Okay. When you went out to the hospital on the 9th, the purpose of going out there, you also had obtained that search warrant for her person, correct?
That's correct.
To obtain the DNA swabs?
Yes,
Okay.
on the inside of her cheek and on her hands.
Okay. And you were also going out there to take
Photos.
photos of Chloe for that particular, okay. When you went out there, you went over her Miranda rights again with her
I did.
and explained to her what the purpose of that particular meeting was for,
Yes.
and that you already had the warrant, and that she was that you were going to do that because that a judge had already told you you could.
Yes. And I
And
put
any-
the paperwork right next to the bed.
Okay, but at any point in time, did she try to fight with you or tell you that you couldn't do that?
No.
Okay, she was cooperative with you?
Yes.
All right, and one of the first things that you told her is that you wanted to make sure that she was okay, correct?
That's correct.
All right, because at that point you had already done some initial investigation, and then there were some red flags that had already been raised.
Huge red flags.
Okay, and one of the purposes, aside from the search warrant, that you communicated to Ms. Driver was that you wanted to get stuff from her body to make sure that nobody had hurt her in particular.
Also to verify paternity and maternity.
Correct, but that was one of the statements you made to her, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so that being said, you did you notice on that day that whether or not you could see her black eye?
Yes.
Okay, but you didn't document that in your report or anything until the next day?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it was present there on December the 9th.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I'm sorry.
on December 9th. Do you remember if it was her left or her right eye? Do you recall?
If she was sitting towards me, it'd be the left.
Left eye, okay.
Mhm.
And it had looked like it had been in the process of healing for some time?
Yes,
Okay. You also told her that she did not have to speak with you at any point in time, correct?
that's correct.
And you did go over that Miranda form, and she did sign it and talk to you,
Yes, ma'am.
and that, you know, she did answer all the questions you asked her, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna show you some pictures. And when you went out there that day, you brought your own camera equipment and everything like that, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and then what kind of items did you bring to do the DNA testing and for the parentage?
I brought some buccal swabs and then an actual DNA swab kit.
Okay, can you explain what a buccal swab is and how you take that?
Sure, it's just a Q-tip, a long Q-tip, and it's sealed. You open it, you put some water on it, put it in their cheek. You don't have to if you don't want to put water on it. Usually saliva is enough. And then with the DNA kit itself, to take blood, you would use water and try to swab from there.
Okay, but she was fairly cooperative with you in that whole process. You didn't have any issues with her?
I did not have any issues with her.
All right. May I approach the witness?
Yes.
These are the photos that I took that day. Yep. Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
You would move to admit defense 8 through 12 and then publish to the jury?
All right, 8, this is 8, 9, I think 8 was
8,
already
9.
admitted.
Oh.
9, 10, 11, and 12.
I'm gonna need to write one these days.
All right, they're admitted.
Can you identify what that picture is?
That is of Chloe Driver.
Okay, and that's one that you took of her on December the 9th?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, is that another one of the pictures you took that particular day?
That's another one that I took that day.
Okay. Can you identify what that picture is?
So that would be a part of her trach and the stab wounds.
Okay, and that's on her chest, the stab wound that's blocked by the air vent,
Correct. And then there's another one up by the trach area.
right up in here?
Yes.
Okay. And what's this a picture of?
Her back.
Okay, and what was the purpose of taking that picture?
I wanted to see if there were any stab wounds to the back as well.
Okay. All right, when you were there and after you completed taking those pictures with her, you were talking to her and she started indicating to you she wanted to communicate with you, but because of the trach in place, she could not
She could whisper.
whisper, but that was difficult for your body cam to pick up, correct?
Yes.
Which is something that you wanted to preserve for this case, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so you went out and you got a Miranda form from another officer?
No, from my binder.
From your, but there was another officer sitting outside of
Right,
that.
but I had it in my binder.
You had it in your binder. And then you went back and went over the Miranda form with her, correct?
I did.
All right, and one of the first things that she asked you is she wanted to know where her baby was, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and then you had the conversation with her that the baby had passed?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, she had asked you if the baby had survived and who was with her, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you also asked her in that interview who did this to you, correct?
Yes.
You were still in the middle of a very active investigation, exploring all potential options, correct?
Absolutely. I had tons of scenarios in my head.
Okay. And those scenarios were still in your head, even though you had already spoken to Benyamin, Jason, Sarah, Gerald.
Absolutely.
Okay. You also indicated to her that you did not want her to or have anyone hurt her anymore, correct?
That's correct.
All right. She continued to speak with you via the writing, correct?
That's correct.
All right. She told you that he didn't do it, she did, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and that she was going insane and no longer wanted to be with his friends, but kept coming back for him. Is that what you recall?
That's pretty accurate.
Okay. And at that point, she had not talked to anybody, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so she didn't have her cell phone at the hospital, correct?
She did not.
And as far as you know, she had not communicated with Benyamin or her parents or anybody up until that particular point, because she was in the ICU, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so you were kind of, aside from the hospital staff, her first kind of point of contact.
I would think so.
Okay. When she agreed to speak with you, she wrote down those answers to your questions. What was her demeanor?
I mean, as any person that was hurt would be, sad.
She was crying,
She was crying.
and at points, I think you would agree with me, she was sobbing,
Oh, yeah.
because there were points and times where you had to go out and ask for the medical staff because things started going off in alarms in the
Oh, yeah.
in the room. So she was having some very real physical reactions to what she was communicating with you about.
That's correct.
Okay, and you were able to observe that, and we saw that on your body cam, correct?
That's correct.
All right. All right. So let's talk about at what point did you learn about a prior, without telling me the contents of it, learn about a prior incident with the Asheville PD?
I think Benyamin is the one who brought it up.
Okay. Did you or your sergeant, after that interview, request the law enforcement reports?
I did.
Okay. And do you remember at what point in time in your investigation you did that?
Oh, I would have done it immediately after I got back to the office.
Okay. Do you know approximately how long it was before you received those?
I don't.
Okay. But that was something that was on your radar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you wanted to find out what law enforcement had to say with respect to those particular incidents? Because you already had Mr. Spillers and Mr. Ben Michaels, correct?
Correct.
All right. And after seeing that video, you were concerned, correct?
Correct.
All right. So on December the 10th, let's talk about what else you did that day. Do you recall going out and seeing Chloe before talking to some other individuals that day? Or do you remember the order of how you did things that day?
I don't remember the
Okay.
order, unfortunately. That was
That's okay.
almost 4 years ago.
Understood.
But I did talk to a lot of people that day, yes.
Okay, so you spoke to, you were contacted by Benyamin. Okay, and I believe you've already told us Ms. Renee Driver, correct?
Yes.
All right, and all of these phone calls actually are recorded, correct?
Everything's recorded.
All right, so they're all documented so that there can't be any dispute as to what was said. Is that
That's
fair?
correct.
All right. And you talked, then you went back out to talk to Chloe because you had promised her you were going to come back the next day.
And I did.
All right, and part of that was because she had asked to be able to speak with her mother and Benyamin, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and you, at that particular point in time, I think also read her Miranda warning again?
I did.
Okay, and that was prior to any of those phone calls?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Do you recall having any conversations with the doctors at Keystone that day prior to talking with Ms. Driver, Ms. Chloe Driver?
I might have, yes.
Okay. Do you recall which doctors those were?
I'm sorry, I don't.
That's okay. Do you recall telling those doctors that that the people she was associating with made her feel paranoid?
No, I don't remember
Okay.
that.
If there's a recording or a transcript that indicates that, you have no reason to dispute that.
I would
correct?
have no reason to dispute that.
Okay. Do you recall telling the doctors about that very video we were just talking about? Do you remember talking to them at all about that?
No.
Okay. But again, if it's in a transcript of
It would be on video recording.
Okay. And again, no reason to dispute any of that. Do you recall talking to these doctors about scenarios where a mom loses a child or anything like that?
No.
Okay. But again, if there's a recording of it.
If there's a recording of it, then absolutely.
Okay. And talking about how sometimes women use desperate measures.
Again.
Okay. I get it's 4 years ago, but if there's a recording.
If
or
there's a
transcript-
recording, then yes.
Okay. Not trying to trip you up. I'm just.
Nope, you don't
all
have
right.
to.
So we went back, and the first phone call you made was to Mr. Ben Michael, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And that was actually before you started talking to Chloe about any other questions or things you wanted to talk to her directly about, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. As you contacted him, and it took a minute for him to answer the phone, correct?
Yes.
Or took, yeah, and he was kind of, I think I heard you kind of going, Ben,
Hello?
Ben?
Yeah.
Like, and at that point, he did not have his phone back, correct? It was a different
did
phone.
not.
So that was a different phone that you had to call him on?
Yes, I think it would have been Jessica's phone that I called him on.
Jessica's phone, okay. And in that conversation, you told him that she couldn't speak still, or could only whisper,
Correct.
and that she was going to be writing down her questions and answers.
That's correct.
And then he understood that you were kind of going to be the middleman to navigate that conversation, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And during this interaction with him, was she crying?
Certain parts, yes.
Okay. And he, started asking her questions about when she went to get the knife. Do you recall that?
I do recall that.
All right. And, she also communicated, at least at that particular point in time, it took a little bit for them to get there, but that she told him that she did not feel like she had a choice.
That's correct.
All right. And that her response, he was not really understanding of what that meant. And so she responded, I felt safest and I felt horrible. I went because I had no choice. Is that your recollection?
That's correct.
All right. And then he asked her, why did you feel like you had no choice? And then she proceeded to write out that answer to you, correct?
That's correct.
And those answers are the ones that were admitted through the state's case, that you didn't alter in any way. That's all her handwriting.
That's
correct?
all her handwriting.
All right. And in fact, you were having to kind of jumble a bunch of paper to try to keep up with her at certain points in time. Is
Oh
that
yeah,
fair?
she was going really fast.
All right. And she wrote down at that point in time that she couldn't handle being with the group anymore and that you left no alternative with certain threats, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So when the word threats came out, did that raise another red flag to you?
Always.
All right. And you, his response was that he wasn't sure what anyone was referring to, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And then you tell him that you asked him to be truthful because you told him that you felt she was being truthful and honest in what she was writing down and communicating with you, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And she started talking about the other girls, their teachings, and blaming herself, I guess, for the world's pain.
That's correct.
All right. And how she wanted a normal life, but she didn't kind of articulate what that meant, correct?
Yeah, I don't believe so.
Okay. And that there was something about he was constantly telling her that she kept distracting and removing. Do you remember him saying that to her, or her saying that to him? And,
Yes, I think she wrote it down.
and that you really weren't sure what she was talking about, but she kept reiterating that point to him. Is
That's
that fair
correct.
to say? Okay. Do you recall her writing down that, after Benyamin asked why, then she responded, "You refuse to listen"? Do you remember her saying that to him?
Yes.
All right. And telling him, how many times did I state how I felt things would go if I remained in that state? You recall that?
Yes.
And the words I think we saw earlier on the screen in her handwriting was that she screamed and begged to him, correct?
Yes.
And that you didn't take, and she thought he didn't take her seriously.
That's pretty accurate.
And then Mr. Benyamin, Ben Michael was repeatedly kept pressing the why question. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
And she was answering that. She was answering with her explanations of what was going on in her mind at that time, correct?
That is what she stated.
Okay. And then one of the things that she ended up saying prior to the conversation ended is that Benyamin taught her about the messed up inner layers and the
Black magic.
black magic that he was doing to their daughter, correct? Or to her, I think is what he said.
Right.
Okay. So you didn't know if he was talking about the child or to Chloe at that point in time.
I knew they were talking amongst each other.
Correct.
Not necessarily about Hannah.
Okay. But at that point in time, you kind of sensed that conversation really wasn't going anywhere, correct?
It wasn't going anywhere for me.
Okay. That's fair. But it was also upsetting her.
Tremendously.
It was, it was evoking a physical response.
That is
with her.
correct.
And so you decided that was pretty much,
Yeah.
we're not going anywhere. And she actually said she had nothing else to say, correct?
Yes.
All right. And then at that end of that conversation, you start talking to her. The first thing I think you said is, okay, I have questions. Like, you wanted to follow up on some of that stuff that you just heard.
Yes.
All right. And one of the things that you asked her about was the cuts on her hands.
That's correct.
Do you recall about how many cuts you noticed on her hand?
Just 2.
Just 2? Were there any on her left hand that you noticed?
Nope, it was just the right.
Okay, but you did make another note in that particular, on that particular day about the black eye again, correct?
I did.
All right, did you happen to notice if any old marks or anything on her wrists?
I did not.
Okay. And you asked her about the black eye, correct?
Mhm.
And she said, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right.
she said she did not know.
And it's not uncommon for people who maybe have been abused or in that way to not identify somebody that might have hurt them, correct?
That's very common.
Okay. And at this point in time, you were trying to establish a rapport with her and get her to communicate with you because you were still in the throes of this wild investigation.
Yeah, I wanted to get more context on the whole situation.
Okay. And at that particular point in time, she told you that she was in the same state of mind for about 2 months, correct?
She wrote it down. Yes,
Yeah.
she did.
All right. And that, that she indicated to you that she had felt like she kept getting worse and no one cared.
That's correct.
All right. And that, that was when I think you showed her that video we were talking about. And then again, that kind of evoked a
physical response again. Yes.
And emotional too, right?
Yes.
Did she turn away and not want to watch it, or she just put her hand and waved?
I think she actually turned her head and put her hand out.
Okay.
If I'm
All right.
making sense of everything. Yeah.
And based on that response, you followed up with that because you're trying to find out what was really going on in this relationship, correct?
I wanted to know all of the relationship. Mhm.
Okay. And you asked her at that point in time, do you feel like he is controlling you? And what did she say? Or what did she write down?
Yes.
Okay. And then you asked her if, I think it was about the CBD. There was some discussion about the CBD.
That's correct.
Because you had indicated that you had learned from one of your interviews that there was discussion about medications or something like that.
Benyamin had told me that
Okay.
he gave her medications.
All right. And then so you were asking Miss Chloe Driver, I'm just going to call her Chloe, then
Yeah,
we'll just go
Chloe's
that way, about the CBD.
That's correct.
All right. At that point in time, had you located or any of the supposed CBD or anything else like that?
So when we looked in the baby bag, it was in the baby bag, but I didn't know it was CBD.
Okay.
I don't know what CBD looks like, so.
Well, let's talk about what was in the baby bag for a second. So I know we talked about the carrots and the identification and the cash and the receipts and stuff, but there actually were 2 things in that bag that were not photographed, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and one of those was the bottle that was, a bottle with a teardrop, a dropper in it, correct?
That's correct.
And then in preparation from this case, we learned that it had a label indicating it was in fact CBD, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and then there was also that little, I don't know if it was glass or plastic, but that little jar of that orange substance, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and then you understand that substance was field tested.
It was field tested, but
Okay.
not by me.
Correct, but that, it didn't field test for anything other than CBD. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware.
Okay, but those things were in that diaper bag at that time too.
Yes.
Okay, and so when she started telling you about this CBD that she had been given by Mr. Spillers or Mr. Benyamin, that stuff actually was in that diaper bag, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and that she told you that when she started that CBD, that it was an increase in paranoia, correct?
Yeah, I think she said she got worse.
Yeah. And then you asked if Jason had ever hurt her, correct?
Yes,
And you were direct. You asked if it was Mr. Spillers, correct?
I did.
All right, and that was after you had already, talked to Benyamin and Mr. Spillers, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and she told you that he had hurt her maybe once or twice, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and then that's where you also learned that additional information about that Asheville incident, correct?
I had already known about the Asheville incident.
No, but that she brought it up to you.
Yes, she brought it up, yes.
Okay, because prior to that, you had learned about it from an independent source, but not necessarily had spoken to Ms. Driver about it.
Correct.
All right. And she told you at that time that she didn't trust them and that she felt scared.
Yes.
Okay. And she didn't tell you who them was, but she didn't use a singular in that sense. It was them.
It was just them, and I asked her who. She didn't give it to me.
She didn't want to give it to you. And that she also told you at that particular time that she just wanted to die with her daughter.
That's correct.
Okay. And throughout these 2 days that you spent with her, she was emotional.
Very.
She was crying
Yep.
and was indicating some level of remorse for after realizing what had happened, correct?
I don't know if it was an indication of remorse, but
Okay,
yes.
but she was showing an emotional and physical
She was.
response that you could see and document. Is that
Absolutely.
fair to say? Okay. And then you decided it would be a good time to contact her mom.
Yes.
Okay, and she at that point had not talked to, as far as you knew, she had not talked to her mom, Renee or Eric Driver, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and again, we think that the first time she talked to someone on the phone was with Benyamin with you, correct? As far
That's-
as we know.
That's correct.
But she certainly didn't have a cell phone
She
there.
certainly didn't have a cell phone.
And she was in the ICU
That's correct.
and didn't have a phone or anything that you could tell within reaching distance from what you
Not that I
recall.
saw.
Okay. So you were able to get her mom, Renee Driver, on the phone, and there was a little bit of difficulty, at least talking to her. So she suggested to do a FaceTime.
That's correct.
All right, and so you did that FaceTime call with on your phone.
Yes.
Okay.
On my work phone.
All right, and she immediately kind of had another emotional response to seeing her mom.
That's correct.
Okay. And she, upon seeing her mom, or first hearing her voice and then deciding a FaceTime call would be better, she had written down, "I'm sorry I killed her, I should have stayed."
Yes.
Okay. And then, one of the things that also came out in that was that Renee asked you point blank, like, did she do these injuries to herself? Because she didn't necessarily know. So she asked you that, correct? On that FaceTime call, do you recall that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that was when you communicated to her that she had, in fact, at least as far as you knew from your investigation thus far, that they were self-inflicted.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you become aware of what exactly Ms. Driver's injuries were, or how many wounds there were?
So I saw the 2 wounds while taking the pictures, but I did not actually get the medical records until much later. So I did not know of the internal actually injuries until I read the reports.
Okay. But when you reviewed those are the Kennestone records?
That's correct.
Okay. So when you reviewed those reports, I think you're indicating those internal injuries that would have included the collapsed lung, correct?
That's correct.
All right. But there was notes about I think 4 or 5 stab wounds to her neck.
Mhm.
Do you recall that?
I do recall that, yes.
Okay. And then the one on her
Chest.
Okay. And when you took that picture of her on the side, it was because of how they had to, for surgery, do you recall which one I'm talking about? I can show you.
I know the back picture you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a bandage on her side. Do you recall if that was from one of the
I don't
wounds?
recall if it was from surgery or not. I can only assume that it was from surgery.
Okay. But she also had that trach, correct?
That's correct.
And she had a
Feeding tube.
What I can presume would be a catheter.
Yep.
And she was hooked up to the whole 9 yards.
That's correct.
All right, and so she really couldn't get up and move around on her own or anything else like that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Let's talk about what else you did on December the 10th, okay? Do you recall when you spoke to Brian's parents? Do you remember when that was?
It would have been a couple days after.
Okay. And you also talked to someone, and you don't need to tell me anything about the contents of that, but someone by the name of Lauren Paget?
I talked to a lot of people, yes.
Okay. But that name sounds familiar?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you recall receiving an additional phone call from Jason Spillers on December the 11th of 2020?
Might have recording of it. I don't know.
Okay. But it wasn't something, you don't have an independent recollection of you calling him, reaching out to him for additional information, correct?
No.
All right. And so you got back to your office and found out that he had called, and you called him back, correct?
Possibly, yes.
All right. But you don't remember the specific contents of that call?
No.
Okay. And I believe we already started talking about this, but Mr. and Mrs. Driver did not live in Georgia, correct?
They did not.
So they had been in communication with you throughout that week, correct?
That's correct.
And they had sent you some emails with additional information kind of every step of the way, correct?
Correct.
And you actually had set up a time, once you figured out that neither one of them could physically visit Chloe in the hospital, you set up a time to sit down and talk to them, correct?
That is correct.
All right, and then they came down to your office?
That's correct.
All right, and you conducted, again, another recorded interview?
That's correct.
All right, and I think you said at that particular point in time is when they might have given you another copy or given you the video at that particular time?
So I know at that particular time, she was stating that she had spoken to Ben Michael's mom and that she had some text messages. And I said, can you please send those to me?
Okay, do you recall whether or not you received those text messages?
Yes, they're in my case file.
Oh, okay. Do you remember reviewing them in this particular case?
Yes,
Okay, but you're saying they're part of the actual case file?
they are.
As this investigation continued, you also reached out to the Bristol Police Department, correct?
I did.
Okay. I'm going to show you what has been marked Defense 14. 13, gosh. May I approach the witness?
Yes. Yep, these are both from me, and I would have submitted this to the Bristol Police Department and the Bristol Buncombe County Social Services for records.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So one of your requests in that email was requesting information for any and all reports on Mr. Brian Elliott Joyce, correct?
That's correct.
And you also gave his alias, correct?
That's correct.
I guess he refers to that as his legal name, Benyamin Eliyahu,
That is his legal name.
legal name, but he was born
Brian
Elliott
Joyce.
Joyce, okay. And you provided his date of birth and referenced what the investigation was for, correct?
I did.
All right. And you also indicate that you sent an email to the Buncombe County Social Work Services office. And where's Buncombe County?
I believe it's in North Carolina.
All right, so then maybe the Asheville, North Carolina area?
I would assume so.
Okay, and that might have been based on the information you had learned from those Asheville police reports, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you ultimately did receive information from both of those departments?
I did.
Okay. All right, let's talk about some of the other things that you did on the 14th of December. One of the things you did was you spoke to a young lady named Gabriella Kuykendall, correct?
I did.
All right, and then you also spoke to another young lady named Brett Tabor, correct?
That's
Or
correct.
Tabar. All right, and actually after those conversations is when you generated those emails, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and the purpose for you when you spoke to Ms. Kuykendall was that you were concerned about an abuse aspect as far as Chloe goes. Is that what you communicated to Ms. Kuykendall?
Absolutely.
All right, and that you were interested in finding out the backstory, correct?
I wanted to know the context of the full relationship
All right, the full relationship with...
between Chloe and Benyamin.
Okay, but you also got, both of those phone calls were in fact recorded too, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and you called Ms. Kuykendall and were asking for the backstory specifically related to Chloe, correct?
That's correct.
But also with respect to Ms. Kuykendall, correct?
That's correct.
And that's based on information you had generated thus far in your investigation. That was where your investigation was leading at that point in time.
That's correct.
All right, and you specifically asked her that you wanted to hear about why she ended up leaving that relationship, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point in time, you told Ms. Kuykendall that Benyamin was not a suspect at that time.
He wasn't.
Okay, but that you believe that he could have played a part in what happened, so you were concerned about that, and that's why you wanted to talk to her.
That's correct.
All right, and that interview again was recorded.
That was recorded.
All right. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to move to admit number 13, Judge, the emails, tender as an exhibit.
Any objection to D13?
No.
D13 is admitted.
All right, Detective Cruz. We'll get there eventually. All right, I'm showing you two different documents.
That's
I'm gonna
correct.
put those up there with you. Can you identify what the, what's marked as Defense 14 for me, please?
It is a financial crimes enforcement network request for research on a specific individual.
Okay, and who are the specific individuals listed in that report?
Benyamin and Chloe Driver, and then Christian Ministries Trust and Children of Christ Trust.
Okay. In that, is there identifying information with respect to both of those individuals?
There is.
Okay, is there identifying information with respect to the accounts or specific financial information you were seeking?
Yes.
Okay. I would at this time move to admit Defense 14 and 15.
Is it two exhibits?
Yes, I did. I marked them separately.
Okay.
15 is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Analysis Center form. So this is a different form than the financial
Correct, but
crime
that's another
form.
one you generated on the same date and time?
That's correct.
All right, and whose names are on that one?
Brian Elliott Joyce or Benyamin.
Okay, and do you know what the dates of those requests were?
They would have been on the same date. Yeah, the same date as this one.
Okay, and I think that's December 14th?
That's correct.
Okay. And this is just a process that you have to go through as a law enforcement agency to obtain sensitive information like financial information or that kind of thing. You just can't serve a subpoena on that kind of thing.
You cannot do that.
All right,
yes.
so you have to submit those forms to the GBI and let them kind of vet that information before they'll release that to you, correct?
That's correct.
All right. At this time, I'll move to tender those as exhibits.
No objection.
Events 14 and 15 are admitted.
We would request to publish, Judge.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, so this is just the page one, which is the face sheet with your information, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and part of this process, you actually have to get your supervisor to certify that they are in support of you doing this, correct?
That's correct.
And in order to do that, there's got to be some sort of basis or in the investigation to do that. Like, you just can't.
I can't submit it on my own.
Okay. And the investigative information in this particular case was sought for a criminal investigation, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And the subject information, as you've already told us, was that this was for Benyamin Eliyahu Ben Michael.
That's
And-
correct.
And you provided the identifying information that you had, and also known as, I think it's the Olorian Christ Trust.
Correct.
All right. And that's the name of one of the trusts that you would come across in your investigation, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And the next one is is Miss Driver's, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And there was also some additional information regarding these trusts that you would come across in your investigation, correct?
That's correct.
And then one of them included this Christian Ministries Trust,
Yes.
okay? And then the next one was the Children of Christ Trust, correct?
That's correct.
And they all have the same address. Did you notice that?
No, they didn't. One was Tamiami Trail, and then this one was Bristol, Connecticut. That's Sarasota, Florida.
Correct, but the
Jacksonville, Florida was, Bristol was for Chloe's driver's address, and then his address was in Clinton,
Okay,
Connecticut.
but they were all related to those trusts, correct? They had different addresses.
Different
related-
addresses,
depending
different
on which
trust
trust.
names.
Okay, and different bank accounts that you could tell.
That I could tell.
Okay, and the one bank account that you were able to ascertain with respect to Mr. Ben Michael and Ms. Driver was that Wells Fargo account that we talked about earlier, correct?
Correct.
And that account is the one that ended in the 6656, correct?
Correct.
And that one was identified as the Children of Christ Trust, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and during your investigation in this matter, you had learned that one of the things Ms. Driver was saying was that Mr. Ben Michael had her take out a loan, or like the economic COVID loan at this particular point in time. That was one of your questions.
That was correct.
One of the, I think, 501c something that they were running as these spirituality nonprofits, whatever you want to call
Correct.
them. All right. And so your investigation led you to request those financial aspects because it was part of this case, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then you we were shown some receipts earlier today regarding this Wells Fargo account. Well, let me ask you this while the state looks those over. Did you turned over those phones for the cell phone dumps with the sheriff's office, correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever review those reports from the phone dumps at all?
I might have.
Okay.
Again, it was 4 years ago, so I'm sorry if I don't remember.
You don't remember if those were part of it? Okay. All right. That's okay. I'm going to show you what I'm marking as D16. This is why I told you you might need your reading glasses, so we'll test your sight.
I'll be okay.
All right.
It says Children of Christ Trust, Chloe A. Driver, TTE, Benyamin, Ben Michael, TTE, Virginia account terms and conditions apply. And then they have a $98,600 balance, or actually minus $101,199.87, which leaves them $207.13.
And can you read what the last 4 digits of that account number were?
Sure, it's 6656.
Okay, so that Wells Fargo account.
Do you want me to read these two?
We'll get to that in a
Okay,
second.
perfect.
So that Wells Fargo account that we were talking about earlier actually had Mr. Benyamin and Michael's name on that account as well, correct?
That's correct.
And it was under the Children of Christ Trust as well, correct?
That's correct.
All right. All right, so if you want to identify the next one.
This says Wells Fargo, account number 6656, available balance $99,907.90. And then it has obviously pending transactions right below it.
Okay, and on the bottom, can you indicate where, does it identify another trust associated?
It does. They are transferring from the Lorian Christ Trust $50,000. And it looks like 2 transactions, but it might just be one.
Okay, but what are the dates on those?
10/2/20. Wow. And then this one is an everyday checking from Wells Fargo, checking number 5702. Available balance of $544.79 on that way to save one. And then the 6656 everyday checking $99,907.90.
Okay, so that 6656 account has both of their names on it under a trust.
Under a trust.
Okay. Where is the... Judge, I'll move to admit defense 16 at this time and request to publish.
Any objection?
Is that what you just ordered?
Yes, ma'am.
No objection.
Tried to move that up there, but that's the information that you just read?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then again, that's the everyday checking that ended in the 6656 that we were talking about?
That's correct.
And then there's reference that they were transferring, someone at least was transferring, scroll down here, the $50,000 potentially 2 times?
Potentially.
From the Lorian Christ Trust.
That's correct.
All right, and then you previously testified in the financial documents that I showed you that you were requesting, one of the entities you were investigating was that Lorian Christ Trust, correct?
That's correct.
And that's the one that it appears to be in Mr. Benyamin Ben Michael's name, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And then this is just the 2 different accounts you just referenced? Okay.
That's correct.
All right. I'm going to go back to these receipts that are states 114, 113, and the overall picture in 112, okay? May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. With those particular transactions, can you tell me what the date of those transactions were?
11/26, and this was of 2020, and then this one says 12/1 of 2020.
Okay. And at this point in your investigation, you were familiar with the 2 incident dates from the Asheville Police Department, correct?
Correct.
All right, and one of those dates actually is the November 26, 2020 date, correct?
Correct.
All right, and do you have any indication on those receipts where the transactions took place, or have any idea where that might be?
It's a location that says Ware Bridge.
Okay. But that's the same, those 2 withdrawals for the $800 and $200 are the same dates as one of the Asheville police incidents that you were investigating, correct?
Correct.
All right. All right, so I know that you had testified that you submitted the phones for examination, correct?
That's correct.
And that's done by someone at the sheriff's office because they have a specific program for that, correct?
Correct.
But you don't have any independent recollection of reviewing specific instances regarding what was in the contents of any of those people's phones, correct?
So I did review the phones. I know that for a fact because I did get Google searches and things of that nature off of Chloe Driver's phone.
Okay.
And that's in my report. But as far as the context of reviewing them for finances and things of that nature, no.
So you reviewed text messages, phone.
I reviewed a lot of things.
Okay,
Let's just
so
say
it's
that.
possible. I'm not asking if you remember the
I
specific
can't remember the
contents.
specifics.
All right, but you remember reviewing the text messages or the contents of those in particular individuals' phones, correct?
Correct.
All right. And do you recall any specific messages that stood out in your mind with respect to Ms. Driver and Mr. Benyamin?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, and you reviewed. Okay. Do you recall reviewing Facebook messages or anything like that?
And again, I've submitted a search warrant for that, and I probably reviewed it, but I cannot remember the context.
Okay, but if it was pulled directly from those phones into what we call the Cellbrite program, then you wouldn't have any reason to dispute what was returned on that, correct?
I would not.
And one of the things you do when you seize people's phones is put them immediately in airplane mode, correct?
Oh, for sure.
Because so then they can't remotely disable them or stop you from downloading whatever's in there, like erase it remotely.
Correct.
All right, and in this particular case, you don't have any specific recollection of those particular messages, but you do recall probably reviewing them in some sort of context based on what you were investigating.
That's correct.
All right, so you don't have any recollection, but you wouldn't dispute that if Ms. Driver sent text messages to Mr. Brian Joyce when he had Hannah in November of 2026, or November 26, 2020, correct? You wouldn't have any reason
I
to
wouldn't dispute any of that stuff.
All right. One of the things in those messages is that Ms. Driver sent to Mr. Benyamin, I know Peggy promised to keep in touch with me, but wouldn't respond to simple things because she had never been there. Everybody is under your spell. Who is Peggy? Do you remember in this investigation who Peggy was?
So Peggy was apparently a friend of Z, or Benyamin, and a friend of Jason Spillers from Asheville, if I'm not mistaken.
And one of the things you knew about this particular case is that based on that video, there was allegations that the child had been taken from Chloe at some particular point in time.
That's correct.
And that time period was approximately November 26th through the 28th or something to that degree from what you could tell?
Correct.
All right. So if Ms. Driver sent a message to Mr. Ben Michael via Facebook that said, I didn't think you would ever take Nimsy away from the breast. You wouldn't have any reason to dispute that, correct?
I would not have any reason to dispute that.
All right. The same thing if Ms. Driver told him that she just wanted to peacefully leave my parents' house and get a catch of breath with Nimsy, correct? You don't have any reason to dispute that?
I would not dispute that.
And Nimsy, again, is what they referred to as Hannah?
Yes, that was her nickname they gave her.
And one of the things she communicated to Mr. Benyamin, it was that he had told her that she'll never see her parents again or never see Nimsy again. You would have no reason to dispute
I would have
any of
no
that?
reason to dispute that either.
But that seems to be kind of along the context of the information you had received in the investigation, is that there was allegations that he had taken her from him or from her, and that she was not in agreement with that at all.
No, and I believe when I interviewed him, he stated that he took an MC.
Okay. One of the other things that you were concerned about was whether or not, she was being controlled by this individual in the relationship, correct?
I was definitely investigating all of that.
And one of the things, let me jump back. When you interviewed Eric and Renee Driver on December the 11th, and then you went down to see Chloe after that interview, correct?
That's correct.
And you talked about not seeing, not giving her Miranda rights, particularly that time, because the purpose of your visit was to allow her to speak with her parents, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and in that particular thing, her dad was begging Chloe to open up to you and tell you what was really going on.
He wanted her to tell me the full story, but he also wanted to talk to her about getting an attorney.
Correct, but part of that conversation, yes, involved getting an attorney, but was also telling her that she needed to tell you everything about what was going on.
Yes, he wanted me to have her talk about what, I guess, Ben Michael was doing.
Okay. But she at no point at that particular time said that she wasn't going to talk to you or answer those questions, right? She continued to talk freely that particular day, even though her dad was asking her to get an attorney, she continued that conversation?
She was just talking to her dad.
Okay. But she didn't stop that conversation when he said any of that, correct?
No.
All right, and that she was wondering, or that he was concerned about explaining the full situation of the control and all of that stuff. He was trying to...
He was trying to have her not protect him.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I gathered from his comment to her.
Okay, but it's not uncommon for somebody that may be in that type of situation to want to protect somebody, correct? And not disclose that to somebody like law enforcement?
Probably. They didn't like law enforcement, so.
Okay. One of the other Facebook messages he and Ms. Driver exchanged in November of 2020 is that she said to him, "I'll see her when it's correct, not under complete planned control by you. You planned for this to happen from the start." Is that, you have no reason to?
I have no reason to deny that.
And then one of the last messages with respect to that exchange, which these are all in the cell phone dump and cell phone records that have already been previously admitted as evidence that you stole a baby away from her mom. Congratulations. Again, consistent with everything that you had already been hearing in the course of this investigation, correct?
Correct.
All right. Some of the things that she was concerned about, or at least appeared that she wanted to get, at least through those messages, get a break away from him with her daughter, with her parents. Is that a fair assessment?
I would assume so.
Okay. Some of these messages seem to indicate that there was at least, some power struggle or elements of coercion or control to manipulate how he would be able to see her daughter again, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to her asking this witness to speculate about conclusions versus just comment on what the actual evidence was.
I can move on.
Rephrase your question.
Yes, ma'am. You would agree with me that the context of those were not ones in which he was agreeable to returning the child. There was some element that there would need to be some sort of compromise on his terms. Is that a fair assessment?
I would assume so.
Okay. Do you recall any text messages or Facebook messages about Chloe telling him that she was coming to get her back, even if it took a year or two to get her back?
And again,
If it's in there, it's in there.
If it's in there, it's in there.
Okay. And so it became at least abundantly clear based on your investigation and what Ms. Driver had conveyed to you that she was, at least with respect to that incident, wanting to get her daughter back.
That's correct.
And that was actually consistent with what you had read in some of those Asheville Police Department reports, correct?
That's correct.
All right. When you received those Asheville police reports, you reviewed them, correct, in the context of this particular case, correct?
Yes.
And were the law enforcement reports the only items that you received with respect to that case? Do you remember if you received any photos or any witness statements or anything else other than the law enforcement reports?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Did you ever reach out and speak to the Asheville investigator with respect to the November 25th incident?
No, I don't believe I did.
Okay. So you didn't make any attempt to contact Ms. Torres or anybody else? You just kind of took what those reports had in them and conducted your investigation from there?
And again, yeah, it was a long time ago, so I don't believe I spoke to Ms. Torres.
Okay, but you took that information that you had received early on in this investigation and kind of used that to kind of create a pathway in how you were looking at this case, correct?
So yes,
And one of the first things that seemed to be abundantly clear in this case, aside from the initial response that it was a murder-suicide investigation, one of the things you were concerned about from the beginning was Ms. Driver's mental health, correct?
yes,
And you actually had some conversations with Mr. and Mrs. Driver about psychological evaluations and all of that stuff, and you know how it could play out going forward.
yeah, I asked if she was ever evaluated when she was younger and things of that nature.
Right, but there was also talks about like when because she was hospitalized, making sure that some of those things were addressed while she was in the hospital, correct? With the psychological evaluation by Dr. Chowdhury or anything else like that?
Yeah, they were gonna do all of that.
They were going to
yes.
do all that. So that was one of the things in your mind that when you continued to investigate this case was kind of on the forefront. Like that was something you were actually investigating, correct?
Correct.
And that also one of the things that you were investigating throughout this situation was the fact that Ms. Driver was potentially a victim of abuse.
I was investigating everything.
Right, and that included because she had the black eye. You have to answer all that.
Absolutely.
Okay. And she had indicated to you that she felt like she was being controlled.
That's correct.
And you are a detective, obviously, but you've received special certifications with respect to domestic violence training, correct?
I have.
And some of those certifications include the ability to, spot some of those things that the average citizen wouldn't necessarily agree or see on their own.
That's correct.
And based on that training and experience is kind of what led you down this path with Miss Driver, correct?
That's correct.
And it's not uncommon for somebody who presents with a physical injury to either deny or not offer an explanation as to what had happened. Is that fair?
It's not uncommon.
And it's not uncommon for a person to not want to talk to law enforcement about what level of abuse or control that they had in fact experienced, correct?
That's correct.
And it's not uncommon for, especially in a conversation where it involves a potential abuser, for them to withhold information in that context as well.
That's correct.
And, in that phone call with Mr. Ben Michael, Chloe was answering and asking questions,
That's correct.
and she was trying to say certain things, but
That's
at the
correct.
same time, it appeared that she might be holding back some things. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment.
And you continued even after that to continue to investigate that particular aspect of that relationship, correct?
I did.
And that included leading you down the road to contacting Bristol Police Department, correct?
That's correct.
To talk to that Brett Tabor, correct?
That's correct.
The allegations were talking to Miss Lauren Paget
That's correct.
and Miss Gabriella Kuykendall.
That's correct.
All right. And that path also took you down this financial road,
Yes, it did.
which I'm sure when you first started investigating this case that you didn't even think that that was a possible animal in this case.
No.
And then ultimately you were able to generate some information about it, but that's kind of where it ended, correct?
Correct.
You didn't ultimately do any referrals to any law enforcement agencies with respect to the information you obtained in that particular that part of your investigation, correct?
So one thing that when I submit for GBI or GSIAC, and then also for the FINRA, they do a separate investigation as well. So when you open up a request or inquiry, they should also do an investigation.
Okay, so they may have done
They
their
might
own-
have, I don't know.
But you don't know ultimately what happened to it
Nope.
in any way, shape, or form?
I don't.
All right. So, how long have you been a detective now?
Going on almost 6 years.
Okay. And prior to that, you worked on the road, right?
I did.
All right. How long were you on the road?
2 years.
All right. And during that road experience, you encountered, I'm sure, several victims of domestic violence, correct?
Too many to name.
Okay. And that so based on your experience and what happened with Miss Driver, you don't have any reason to dispute that it's not uncommon for them to cover for their abuser.
I don't have any reason to dispute that.
Okay. And it's not uncommon for somebody to want to communicate with that abuser, correct?
Correct.
And that, or to continue to take steps to try to get away from that abuser, correct?
Correct.
And that sometimes it takes multiple attempts to break that cycle, correct?
That's correct.
And sometimes that involves setting up a separate checking account or doing stuff without their partner knowing, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so it's not uncommon in your experience for individuals to not be successful the first time they get away from their abuser, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and it wouldn't be uncommon for a person to continue to talk to that abuser just based on an emotional connection to them, correct?
That's correct.
Despite what they may or may not have done to them.
That's correct.
All right, and that's what, is generally called what, the cycle of violence?
It is a cycle of violence.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Redirect.
Were you investigating any acts of domestic violence committed in Cherokee County?
No, I was not.
Was there any evidence of any acts of domestic violence ever committed in your jurisdiction?
No.
Okay. So when she used the broad term of were you investigating this, was this just to provide context to the murder of Hannah Driver?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you looked at all angles of the history of the relationship, the financials, everything that you reviewed, is that what led you to your conclusion to charge Ms. Driver with the offense of murder against her daughter?
That's correct.
Okay. She indicated earlier, she asked you a question about why you ended the conversation between Benyamin and Ms. Driver, and she said the conversation wasn't really going anywhere, and you said it wasn't going anywhere for me.
Definitely not.
And was it your purpose of facilitating that communication at that time to focus on what happened to Hannah?
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of the relationship and Ms. Driver's decision whether to stay or go, or her participation in this cult or not, did those things in any way impact your assessment of who killed Hannah Driver and what happened surrounding the death of Hannah Driver?
No.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you.
Any further cross-examination?
Just a Detective Cruz, I never asked you if you were investigating any specific acts of domestic violence with respect to Chloe Driver in this particular jurisdiction, correct?
Correct.
But you would agree with me that any acts of domestic violence with respect to an individual that you're currently investigating, regardless of jurisdiction, is relevant to your inquiry, correct?
Everything's relevant to inquiry.
And at no point in time was Ms. Driver ever trying to negate the physical act of what happened, correct? She was telling you that she had killed her child, correct?
She did tell me she killed her child.
But she was talking to you about why that happened, correct?
Yes.
And what was going on in her mind, correct?
Yes.
And that what she had experienced with Mr. Benyamin Ben Michael, as much as she was willing to offer to you.
As much.
Okay, so you would agree with me that, yes, you were investigating the death of Hannah Driver, correct? But a defendant's mental state and what has happened to them is relevant in the course of that investigation, correct?
In context.
Correct, but it is part and parcel of what we're doing here today, correct?
I would say so.
And so investigating a defendant's acts of or domestic violence against a defendant or or the mental health status or anything else is just one part of your investigation for everybody to consider, correct?
It's just one piece.
Thank you.
Anything else of this witness?
No, nothing further.
All right, you can step down. Thank you. And we are going to take a recess then at this time until 3 o'clock.